Hi everybody, welcome back. So what you see in front of me is a lovely Jubilee class, and it's come all the way from Galgorm Hall. Sorry about the noise in the background, that's my compressor, and it will make a funny noise as it reaches its desired pressure in a moment. But not to worry, I'm going to start weathering this. I just wanted to sort of show you this as it is before I got to weathering it, and then it can grace my tracks again before it heads its way back up to Paul. So there you go, we'll get on. So first things first, let's make sure this loco is pretty clean of dust and debris. So I'm using a fine brush just to get in all the nooks and crannies, loosen up anything, and then blow it away with clean air through the airbrush. There is no paint. And I'm putting in some tissue into the cab to protect all the detail inside of that. I don't want that to end up fully covered with grime and mess as we proceed with the airbrushing. I'm using Humbrol's Mask Gold to glaze, to cover all the glazed areas of this loco. I don't want any paint to end up on those. I want to keep them nice and clean. Sometimes you can put a sort of a mask on, especially on diesels with window wipers. You can use that little and sort of spray in a bit of the glass and sort of create the effect of where the wipers have gone. But on this one, of course, that won't be the case. You could put a bit of grime on it, but one would have to suggest that the loco crew would have kept the glass pretty clean. They've got to see where they're going, they've got to look down the line, and so one would assume that that is fairly a standard procedure. Now I'm putting in a sort of grimy mix. I'm using Humbrol enamel paints for this, and I can't be specific on the colors because I pre-mix a lot of mine into jars or small sort of preserve jars, and to that end they are very general color mixes. They are browns, light browns, tans, blacks, and amalgams of all of those things. But what I'm doing here is I've just dull off the loco itself and give it a fairly grimy, dirty, dusty look, and take the shine off it at the same time. And it's a very, as I say, it's a very, very general spraying down, but at a bit of distance, not right up close. It doesn't need to be. The paint almost dries as it hits. Now I'm coming in a little bit closer, and the I'm using a different color. I'm using a lot more of a orangey, a brownier color to mimic the rust, and I'm suggesting the cylinder boxes have got this sort of base layer of rusty orangey brown color, and I'm going to do that on several places. And it's merely, I mean, all the colors that I airbrush to the loco are as in painting. It's just like having a block-in session. When you're doing a painting, you put all your big shapes in pretty much by blocking in the base colors, and from there you start going over in several passes on your painting and create more detail on each successive pass. It's no different to this. I'm using the airbrush to suggest a general blocking of color, a base layer under which I can then add the weathering powders later. On this part around the water filler, I'm using the same mix in there as I did on the rusting cylinders. Water is going to be sort of built up, it's going to rust that area, and also around where the coal is. I've already removed the coal, the plastic coal that was in the model, so I've got an open cockpit to which I can weather that and make it quite authentic, and add real coal further on down the road. But this is, again, I'm just getting prepared by adding all these layers in and seeing where we need to go with the weathering powders further down the road. Adding some of that same colour along the underframe and on all the areas underneath the tender there, and around the front and on the sides along the wheels, and also, I don't know if that's called a running plate, but just generally a bit more dirt, a bit more grime. I don't want to overdo it, but I want it to look really weathered down. I want it to look not in such a corrupted state. I want it to be in heavy traffic and having not had a good clean off for such a long time. But it's not derelict, it's not near the end of its life, and it's certainly not in scrapyard condition. So this whole video, I should have said at the start, is a mix of real time and speeded up situations, and I didn't think that you wanted to watch the whole of this video in real time, and so I decided to mix that up a bit. I'm using a bit of a black mix, and I'm just dulling down where I got a little bit too heavy with the lighter sandier colors. I've gone in now and dulling it back across the top of the Loco chassis itself, or not chassis, that the bodywork, sorry, and that of the tender, just along the top where it got a little bit too light. I've just gone back in with some darker, duller, almost black but not black, and it's just making that whole thing well, just dirtier, I suppose. Grungier, is that a good word? I think it's a good word. We'll call it grungier. But I think I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm going down with a bit more of the dark to suggest where the smoke and the soot sort of lay along the top of the thing as the Loco's going along. Now I'm using a little bit of thinner, and it is a little bit. I've got a brush, I've put some on, and I've taken most of it off. I do not want it running uncontrollably, so this is just enough to make the paint lift and move the paint, and I'm just trying to mimic some sort of where the water runs down and picks up dirt and streaks it down the side of the tender. I'm doing both sides of it, trying to make them different. Nice trick, running it through the logo, the BR logo. That's fun too. So I'm sort of coming to the end of that part, but now I'm going to look at the front, and I'm going to do a bit of weathering powders now. I've done all the airbrushing I need to do, and I'm coming into getting started. Now this to me is the next pass. This to me is where I actually start as an artist and start creating my painting, but in this case with weathering powders. And to me it takes quite a long time to do this. As I said earlier, I didn't make this a real-time, completely real-time video, because the whole of this process, start to finish, was just under 2 hours. My timing on it, I wanted it to be really an hour, but I will be honest and say that there was a little bit further on that I had to take the entire side off of the, not literally, but I had to take all the weathering off the one side of the tender, and I had to come back in and do it again. So that's why it took 2 hours, and that's partly why I cut this down. But at the same time, I felt that I wanted to try and make this, if I do these things commercially in any way, that I feel that they need to be between an hour and an hour and a half's work to give this a real solid detailed weathering, and come out with something that the new owner will be proud of. And I think that with this one I went over the mark a little bit in time, but hey, you know, nothing's ever that precise, is it? I paint a picture commercially, I give it an hour and a half, 3 hours, 5 hours, 2 days, whatever it is. If it takes longer, it takes longer, and I feel that I have to say that a painting is finished when I finished it. And it's no different to a Loco. I'm not going to stop because I'm nearly finished and I've gone over my time. If this takes an extra half hour's work to get it looking good, that's what I will do. And that, in this case, is what I actually did do. I'm putting some grimy darks and dirt, frame dirts, and a bit of black mixed into it onto the top. And again, it's where I think that, you know, coal or soot amalgamates around hatches and around little bits and pieces, but as it rains, some of that runs off and it creates streaks and grime marks. Again, I'm using that trick as I did on the BR logo, I've come straight through the numbers with that, and they will be polished off because obviously they were identification marks, and the crew would have at least wiped a rag and cleaned that little bit off so that the number on the locomotive and on the buffer bars, front, etc., would have been seen or able to be seen by whoever needed to see them. So as I say, this is where I'm literally painting, and this is really the part I quite enjoy. Like that, I really enjoy it because, you know, it is like painting a picture, and I'm looking at it and I'm pitting my wits about looking at photographs, which is what I've done on this. I have a selection of LMS Jubilees on my screen I'm referring to. So some of these marks that you see are in direct response to what you see on some of the pictures, and I'm trying to mimic that. And this is what I was saying, this is part of my sort of the ability to try and pit your wits against creating something that looks quite real. When I paint something on canvas, I'm trying to recreate something and make it look real. This is no different, and I just love the process. I just happen to be painting on a 3-dimensional canvas. It's a whole heap of fun. Come in with a few close-ups here and there just to show you some finer details. And it does seem to the casual observer that I am repeating many steps. I seem to be going over the same area again and again. And to a point you'd be right, but I'm looking at the whole thing all the time. I'm judging, do I need a bit of this here? Do I need a bit more of that there? I may have done something that's flattened off a little bit, needs a bit more work on it. And so I take a little bit of care to do that. I just come in with a bit more of fluid just to put a bit of streak down where the water's run down through and out, down over the cylinder. And now I'm putting a bit more grime, a little dark, that I'm sort of buffing into each side of some of these bits on top of the bodywork. And I think I'm sort of not at the end, but I'm looking quite honestly at slowly bringing this to fruition. I've got to say that I said about passes in this whole process, and I've gone over it generally with a lot of weathering and weathering powders, and I use the standard colors that you can get in the Humbrol range. I'm not using anybody else's make. I do have them, but on this particular job I just use the 4 or 5 colors, and I tip some out into a little watercolor sort of plastic tray thing that I can put different ones in, pick them up. Some get knocked and mixed up together. I'm not worried. It's just a general look, and you can sort of see from all the colors that I'm using, they are fairly consistent. And if you use too many, then you start, like a painting, you get too many colors going on and it looks disjointed. At least when you're using, say, 4 or 5 colors, in this particular the Humbrol ones, then you have doesn't matter which combination you use, there is an amalgam of each and every one in each and every mix you use, and therefore there seems to be a harmony across the whole of the weathering. And I firmly believe that. So that is why I stuck to just the one series of colors. And all the colors I use, as I say, they are in here somewhere, either as individual colors or as mixes of or combinations thereof, each of them. I think I know what I just said. I'm not too sure. Anyway, I think that's about right. I'm sort of adding more and more detail, and I'm refining with smaller bits here, little bits there. This is where I really wanted to uncover the numbers. They got a little bit covered over with the streaking, so I used a little bit of thinner, just gently. You don't want to overdo it. Don't want to take the numbers off. Got to be very, very careful you don't overdo this. And then I just want to make as though one of the crew have just used a big rag and just cleaned off that area so that the locomotive can be recognized, I suppose, is the best thing. But that's what that little bit's about, and I did the same on the other side just to check. I also did a little bit of fluid onto the buffer beams. It's where maybe it's got a little bit wet, maybe well, a whole host of reasons, but I left it so that the stuff would push the pigment of the weathering powders to each side, and that is quite an effective little thing, because it looks like some water's run down, pushed the dirt to one side, then dried, and yeah, it just makes a very different feel to the whole thing. I'm using 1 or 2 areas also just to bring down some wet streaks from the water filler. This actually was added to. I didn't feel that this was enough later on, and for that I'll tell you what I use when we get to that part of the video. But I'm actually just sort of trying to make a reason why that rear buffer beam would have had a lot of water down over the red surface as well as down the back of the tender. So all the time I'm looking at checking, seeing where I can add something else, seeing what needs to be done, putting a bit more of the streak down the side of the tender and the tender body. I soften the edges. I didn't want it as a hard line, so I have the tissue there just to soften off the effect and not make it so hard. And I'm doing the whole thing along this side, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. I try always that whatever I do on one side of the loco, I repeat on the other at the same time. Otherwise, you're going to forget something, it's not going to get done, and you're going to come to the end of the process, and where you seal the whole of the thing in with some matte varnish spray from Humble or whoever, and you'll have forgotten something. So try and get into the situation where you literally repeat yourself. Make them different. Don't make the same marks each side. That's not what I'm saying. They need to be as random as you can make them. But if you do one side of the tender with something, repeat it on the other side, and so you don't forget something. You saw there that I was actually using my hand as a brace, so I got a good steady while I was working on a little bit of detail there. Now I'm just coming tight on the front where the ash has created a lot of white effects on the front of the locomotive, and it might look a little bit strong, but don't forget all of these effects will dull down when you put some matte varnish spray over the top. It kills it off. It's actually the same thing when, as an artist, I paint in pastels. People often ask me, do I fix my pastel or my pastel painting? And the answer is no, I don't. I never do, because what happens to spraying pastel, it dulls down, it kills the effect. And I would love to be able to do these and create the exact effect without doing a dulling down, but unfortunately these models have to be handled by their owners and picked up and moved around, and you don't want all this stuff to be sitting on the top and just coming away in one's hands. I have seen several videos in the past where one does see a model that's been weathered by a company, and I think in one video I saw online, I don't know who it was now, but actually the weathering, the factory weathering was actually coming off in somebody's hand, and I thought that was awful. Very, very bad, very shoddy. But hey, there you go, that's just an opinion, and I'm not naming names, and I don't even remember the company who did it. But there you go. So back to this one. It's almost coming to an end. You can see the effect has been built up over the last 19-20 minutes, and you can see what's happening, and we're sort of bringing this in close up to the end now, putting some like grimy darks on the top, which I felt that it needed. There wasn't enough there, and I just wanted to put a bit more in and suggest sort of some streaking and runoff from rainwater or whatever. So yeah, I'm cussing on a lot, and just this voiceover. I've never done one for a train video before, but I do a lot of them for my painting videos, but not for the train videos. So I thought this would be an interesting way of presenting this little video for you. And by all means, at the end of this, any thoughts or comments you got on the whole of the process, you're please at liberty to put them in. I'm quite happy, and if you think I've done something wrong, feel free to tell me. I'm big, broad-shouldered enough to take it, I'm not worried. And in fact, I love it because I learn from it, and I learn from the comments that I get on all my videos. Now I'm coming in. I did say I added something extra, and what I found from a video about a year or so ago, that somebody was using craft floor polish. Now I think it's a guy called I think it's Keith Shackleton, I'm not too sure, a well-known guy who does a lot of weathering. I'm not sure if it was him or somebody else, and I'm not even sure if I got his name correct. I apologize if I haven't, but he talked about, or somebody talked about, using craft floor polish, the original one. It's been out of production for donkey's years, but if you can still get one, it's like gold dust, and it's a great way of using varnish or creating wet effects. And I did that on the back of the tender where the water well was, and also on the grease areas around the axles of the tender. So that's all had that treatment, and hopefully that will stay. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it needs a bit more, but you just got to look at that. So again, I've just gone back in with a bit more detail on this tender and trying to blend some of the effects. Some of them are a little bit too harsh, and I just wanted to knock a few of those back, and yeah, just blend it all in really. But I have had a lot of fun with this, and I do hope that it graces Galgorm Hall's tracks for many years to come, because I've enjoyed it, and I know Paul, well, in fact, at the time of doing this narration, I've talked to Paul, and he has said to me that he's over the moon with it. It's fantastic, and so he's a very happy client, and I'm really pleased about that. So yeah, final looks, check it over. Anything else that needs to be done gets done at this point, and we're pretty much finished with the whole process. So what I was saying, I was saying that the voiceover was a bit odd to do this, but I think it's worked out, and you'll tell me in the comments anyway how this came over as a video, and whether you enjoyed it or not, and what else I could do really. And at the same time, guys and girls, if there's something out there that I can get my hands on to whether you want to see, or something that I do weathering wise that you would like me to do, put that in the comments, because if I can get my hands on it, I'll weather it. I love it, and it's a whole heap of fun. Not too much though, because I have got a whole heap of stock myself that I need to weather for me. In the current light of what's going on in the world, I think will be something that I can turn my attention to, is doing a lot more weathering of stock wagons, coaches and engines on Sandling Junction over the coming months. So I think I've got no excuse now not to get out there and do a little bit. But it's really nice also, since I got my gallery sorted out at the back, where I can go in there and weather and do all my modeling away from the train room and away from my studio. So that has massive advantages for me moving forward. So that's pretty much it. It's just I's and T's now. I'm just sort of touching bits here, touching bits there before I finalize and finish off and spray it up to seal all of this work in. And I hope you've enjoyed this process. I've enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed editing this video down. It's a bit of a challenge at times. There's quite a lot of it. Now the final piece, I'm just putting some real coal in, and these are literally real coal that I've crushed myself, and I add some various sizes and what I call chunk coal. I don't know if that's its proper name, but try and make it a little bit realistic and vary the load. I vary the loads on all the locos. Even if I'm modeling the same locomotive in class, I actually change how much coal goes into each and every one, because none of them are going to go around exactly the same. And that's why I think the ability to put real coal into your locomotive weatherings is a great advantage. Hi everybody and welcome back. This is a culmination of a weathering commission that I've done for Paul at Galgorm Hall, and it's his Jubilee class. I'm just going to come in a little closer, you can get a better idea of it. I was really pleased with this because I didn't want to make it sort of at the end of its life, i.e. scrapyard condition or anything close to that, but I wanted to make it as though it's been in heavy traffic for a good deal of time and is a little bit on the neglected side, so there's rust around the cylinders and things like that, but the rest is just grime, there's dirt streaking down the tender sides, etc, etc. So hopefully I've achieved it, and it's going to start to go back up to where Paul is on Galgorm, and hopefully the first time you will see it will be on his track. I will delay putting this one out until he has seen it and aired it. That's only the right thing to do, but I'm just taking the opportunity to film this part before it does do that. I will also put it a little bit of running around on Sandling Junction before it heads out, but you get the idea. I'm really pleased with it, as I say, and I'm pretty sure, or at least I hope, Paul is too. Failing that, I think it'll end up on eBay, but there you go, we'll see. Take care everyone, and I'll catch you all very, very soon.